Bueno, pues yo creo que vamos
Right,
a
I
dar comienzo.
believe that we shall resume this afternoon session for the punctual audience who's been sitting here for a while.
Vamos a reanudar esta
And
tarde con dos conversaciones y esta primera
with two
conversación
conversations, the first one being devoted
esta vez por el pensador que, como decía esta
to
mañana,
the thinker
es
that,
Édouard Glissant,
as
¿no? El poeta y filósofo
Édouard Glissant, the
ruso,
Martinican poet and writer who suggested to substitute the idea of
la
single
idea
closed identity
de la ciudad que está
to
hecha de contactos,
a
de
relational
relaciones y de intercambios, una
identity
ciudad que
full
no
of
teme al
exchange,
otro
not
porque
fearing the
sabe que
other,
solo existe
because it
en
knows
la
that
interacción.
it only
Y
exists
nuestros dos
with
invitados
relationship to
de cómo
him.
articular
And our
esa
two guests know
fraternidad que
perfectly well how to
o
articulate
sea,
this
no
fraternity
pide
that doesn't
a
require to be
nadie
uniform, that does
que es
not
para
uh,
pertenecer.
request anybody
Estamos con
renouncing
nosotros
to what they are to
Lauren Beukes, es
belonging.
escritora
Miss Lauren Beukes, she's a writer and journalist from South Africa.
una sociedad
She
que lleva
writes from a
décadas intentando
society
reparar
which
las
has
heridas
been
de su
decades
historia
trying to heal their wounds,
y
and
solo
she
se
knows well that
recupera
reconciliation
se
cannot
construye
be
con
passed on a
paciencia,
decree, but
con
rather it's
sinceridad,
being
con la
upon with
disposición a mirar
patience,
al otro sin borrar lo que
with
ha
the
ocurrido
regard
entre
to the
nosotros.
other without
Y su literatura
deleting what's happened between the two of us. And her literature
y la
does
que
not solve tension, but rather
las convierte
it inhabits them. It makes them
muy,
matter
muy
of
contenta de
thought.
que
And
esté
I
aquí.
am truly honored and
Muchas
happy that
gracias,
she's
Lauren.
here today. Thank you so much, Lauren.
Muchas gracias también a Mohamed Bourouissa,
Also, a
que está viendo desde
heartfelt
diferentes
thank you
zonas del
to
mundo
our visual
importante.
artist and guest, Mohamed Bourouissa.
Una pregunta
His work
es muy
poses a
camusa.
question, which is
¿Quién
also a very
tiene
Camusian
el
one.
poder de
Who
representar?
holds the
¿Quién queda
power and
fuera
who can
de ese poder?
represent and who
Mohamed ha
lies
dedicado su
outside that
práctica
power?
de
Mohammed
darle
has devoted
dignidad
his
a las
artistic
imágenes del
practice
mundo
to
sin
shed dignity
justificar,
to
sin
the
ser
images that
visibilismo,
generally
sino
the
como una
world
prescripción que es
makes
sí misma
invisible
un
with the
acto
right
político.
precision
Con ellos
and as a
dos comenzamos.
political act.
Muchas gracias.
So you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. It's a
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias por vuestra amable invitación. Sí, ¿pueden ver la presentación? Sí, ¿me podéis ayudar, los compañeros de audiovisual, por favor?
Great. I'm Lauren Beukes. I'm a writer, and I'm going to be talking about Ubuntu, which is not the programming language, storytelling animals, community, and creative resistance. So I grew up in South Africa under apartheid. I live in London now. And it's given me a very particular perspective on the world, growing up under a racist and oppressive regime, and also how we fought against that regime. I'm also a writer, and I believe that, I might be a little bit biased here, but I believe that storytelling is the most important human characteristic. It is what makes us human. And I love this quote by Muriel Reixayer: "The universe is made of stories, not atoms." As far as we know, we are the only storytelling animals. So elephants can plot, they mourn their dead, and they can plot revenge. They also have names for each other, which an AI study showed recently. But they don't come up with a neo-colonial storytelling about elephants. Similarly, killer whales have taught each other how to attack yachts. Very interestingly, if we're talking about fraternity, killer whales are actually a matriarchal society, and both elephants and orcas are the only species who also have menopause. But yeah, so orcas have taught each other how to attack yachts. And they've also got a fashion trend where they wear dead salmon on their heads like a hat. And that's amazing. But again, that's not really storytelling the way that humans tell stories, where we tell stories as metaphor and allegory. So, as you know, the elephants are not telling a story about Baba the elephants like being a neo-colonial king. Killer whales are not telling stories about humans, visiting the humans 20,000 leagues above the sea. We use story as a way of understanding each other and the world. Back in ancient history, like this is a way we explained how the world worked to each other. The night was the gods drawing like the curtain across the sky. Every terrible weather was explained through capricious gods throwing a tantrum and throwing lightning like some toddlers throw a tantrum. In Norse mythology, we had Thor. In Japan, we had Raijin. And in Zulu mythology, we had Impundulu, the lightning bird. So it's really a way of us understanding the world. And of course, stories are how we justify things to ourselves. So for example, people coming to colonize the African continent justify it to themselves as they deserve those resources. They deserve to explore. They deserve to go out there and enslave people. Similarly, under apartheid, the apartheid government, the white racist apartheid government, told themselves a story that black people are inferior and they need to be controlled and they're not like us. And I think what was so inspiring about growing up in South Africa and growing up through this terrible time was that we were able to change the story. So after 400 years of colonialism, after almost a century of apartheid, where people were enslaved or forced into terrible labor jobs, working in the mines, where people were killed, where they were tortured, where they were denied their human rights, we managed to change the story. White South Africans voted in a referendum to vote for democracy, and we had our first democratic elections. And I wish every country could do this. We got to reboot our country from scratch. We got to say, hey, you know what? None of that was working. What are the values that are critically important to us? What are the things which matter? How can we rebuild our country and do things better this time? And Mandela based that, and Desmond Tutu and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and everything which came into founding this new democracy was very much based on the spirit of Ubuntu, which I'll explain in one moment. South Africa is an incredible country. We have one of the most progressive constitutions on earth. We were the 5th country in the world to ratify gay marriage. We were the first country to enshrine abortion as a constitutional right, which I know France tried to say they did 2 years ago. Sorry, guys, we did that in '96. And at the same time, we also have huge social problems because you can't erase history. You can't erase the wrongs and the suffering which happened throughout all that time. So we have a 57% youth unemployment rate. We are the 5th highest country in the world for gender-based violence, and we have the highest Gini coefficient in the world, which is the divide between rich and poor. So for all these amazing values, we are still a country that struggles and suffers, and you can't erase history, but you have to try and find a way to work through it. We came through this crazy time. There was no violent revolution. There were plenty of deaths, but not at the time. And it was really amazing to have incredibly inspiring South Africans like this. Unfortunately, now the most famous South African is this jerk. And it's incredibly painful to me that he seems to not have taken on any of the spirit of Ubuntu. And he has a quote which he gave on the Joe Rogan podcast recently, which was, "Empathy is the fundamental weakness of Western civilization." Compare and contrast to Mandela, who said, "Our human compassion binds us to one another, as human beings who have learned how to turn our common suffering into hope for the future." And of course, I think there's a reason South Africa, together with Ireland, were the people to take Israel to the IJR. Ask us how we know it's apartheid. Ask us how we know it's a genocide. But the foundation of the new South African democracy was based very much on the spirit of Ubuntu. I know most people might know it as a programming language, but it is in fact a South African philosophy. It's best explained as a person is a person because of other people. Derrida was like, I think, therefore I am. But Ubuntu is that we are human only because we have other humans around us, because we are human in relation to each other. I am because we are. And I think that's such a foundational way of thinking about the world and who we are and how we relate to each other and what we owe each other. So I know part of this program is to focus on what we can do and kind of solutions. So it's not just throwing out big ideas. And I actually have some things that I've been thinking about deeply. And if I go on too long, please somebody cut me off. So these are lessons from the struggle against apartheid. And the first one is that stories are dangerous. And stories are dangerous because propaganda can be used to justify that immigrants are the problem, or that colonials were justified in going and taking over and plundering resources. But also the stories we can fight back with stories. Stories are weapons. And you can do that very literally. In South Africa, we have an amazing activist and actor, John Carney, Dr. John Carney. You might know him as the King of Wakanda in Black Panther. And you might also notice that he's got like something slightly wrong with his eye, and that's actually because it's an artificial eye. Because in the 70s and the 80s in South Africa, he was in a lot of performance and theater which directly criticized the apartheid government. Here he is with Athol Fugard and one of his other actor cohorts, Shona. And he was so badly beaten by the security police, by the secret police in South Africa, that he actually lost his eye. And so stories can be literally dangerous, and we have to be prepared to fight for our stories and to kind of put ourselves behind them. And that's a huge risk that we take, but stories don't have to be literal. Like, they did very literal pieces about kind of racism and apartheid and fighting back. You can be kind of more left field and more creative and playful and a bit sneaky. Because the other thing is that fascists are stupid. Fascists are stupid. In apartheid South Africa, there's a lot of censorship. The apartheid government banned a lot of books, so obviously they banned Nelson Mandela's memoir. Writers like Alex Laguma, Nadine Gordimer. They also banned anything sexual. You know, we were very like Dutch Reformed Church-driven society. So Leigh Chagli's lover, Lolita, very, very banned. But then the apartheid government also banned Black Beauty, about the horse, because you couldn't have those two words together because people might get ideas. And yeah, I mean, this is real. So, you know, fascists are stupid, and the thing is, you can outwit them, but sometimes they outwit themselves. And there's a great story that I love telling about, I think like 87, there was a TV show about aliens called V. And I was quite young, and I loved the show. It was so great. Like, the aliens come down to Earth, and they seem to be our friends, and they're lovely, and they're going to give us peace and love and understanding, but then we see them eat a rat. And then we find out that they're actually there to eat humans. And they peel off their faces and they reveal that they're reptiles underneath. And the first 2 episodes was aired, and then suddenly it went off air. It got ripped off the air. And I said to my mom, what happened? Like, you know, what was the problem? And she's like, well, the problem was that the humans fighting against the aliens were called freedom fighters. And in the struggle against apartheid, Mandela and the ANC and APLA and everybody else were called freedom fighters. And that's apparently why I got taken off air. But decades later, I found out the real story, and it was even dumber than that, which is that our second last apartheid president was P.W. Bourouissa, and his nickname was the Groot Crocodile, which means the big crocodile. And he was so vain, he thought the show was about him. He genuinely thought it was American propaganda directed specifically at him, and he had it taken off air. So fascists are stupid, but he was also stupid because the actual dangerous show, and of course this is a problematic example now for reasons you'll hear in a moment, I think the really dangerous show at the time was The Cosby Show, because it showed that Black people were people too, which was something that white South Africans had not had to deal with, that you could have upper middle class people who were doctors and lawyers and had kind of family drama and were dealing with troublesome teenagers. And that capacity for story to break through and tell us about who we are and show us who other people are is incredibly powerful. The problem is that fascists want to make us stupid too. And this is my anti-AI rant. I've got a lot of slides here, so I'm just going to run through them quickly. Under South Africa, we had the Bantu education system, which was an inferior education system designed for Black people. And it was designed to keep them as laborers and mine workers and domestic workers and gardeners. And so they wouldn't get any big ideas. And LLMs and ChatGPT and AI is genuinely the Bantu education of our time. It is corroding our ability to think critically. It is destroying our civilization. This is the new Bantu education, and it's what the tech overlords want. And I know that sounds like conspiracy, but the fact is, although we all live in our own countries, we actually live in American techlandia, because we live in a world which is driven by Google, by Amazon, by Facebook, by Meta, by Instagram, by LinkedIn, and they are bound by American laws, and they are complicit in the American government and the American government's agenda right now. So we all live in that place, and when we use AI, we are bowing to them, we are listening to them, we are taking on their propaganda, the falsehoods, the misinformation, and we're learning to not think anymore. Here's just some headlines I pulled from a talk from last year. So the hallucination is getting worse. Everyone's cheating their way through college. I have friends who teach at graduate level who say they're getting graduate students who don't know how to write an essay. Yeah. It's also like creating like a lot of disinformation. Again, these are dangerous stories because these stories are blatantly untrue and they're being used by right-wing propaganda. Scammers are using them to dupe people, forcing teenagers, like blackmailing teenagers. There's been a spate of like teen suicides. It's driving like really bad misogyny online. It's really, really bad. Please stop using AI. I think this quote is really great. What does a human slowly going insane look like to a corporation? It looks like an additional monthly user. The tech lords do not care, and they want us to be stupid, so please stop using it. I think the worst thing is even that a lot of the time AI is not even tech, it's actually humans. This is the Mechanical Turk, which was a chess-playing machine in Russia in some century, 18th century, I think. But actually a lot of the tech that's happening right now and a lot of AI is actually humans. So Kenyans are being used to kind of analyze the worst of like the internet, and they're looking at like the most horrendous porn. They're like monitoring Google Meta glasses. They're really suffering. And you know, the Amazon's Go stores were driven by people sitting in India watching a computer. There was no AI involved. Microsoft startup, which was just like 700 engineers pretending to be AI. So there's so much of this stuff which isn't even AI, which is even worse. This, I think, is really just horrendous. This happened last year where somebody created a virtual avatar of a Sudanese refugee, and she could answer your questions, but she's not real. You know, so like what we need to be doing is talking to each other more, and not to some AI pretending to be a human. It's mad. Right. So lesson 4 is looking after each other. It's very easy to feel overwhelmed. I've spent a lot of my time feeling overwhelmed with how bad everything is right now. And, you know, it's not just Gaza, it's also Sudan, it's the DRC, it's what's happening in Iran and Ukraine right now. And it's really easy to feel like overwhelmed, but we can also change our own story and looking after our own community. And this can happen in small ways where you're looking after your friends, or I'm part of the science fiction community. And last year I was at a con called EasterCon in Ireland. And the trans ruling had just come out against trans people's rights in the UK, where trans women were not going to be allowed to use a women's bathroom anymore. And I was so angry about this, and I wanted to donate some books to like try and raise some money. Another writer, Jeanette Ng, was like, oh, I also would like to donate some books and raise money. And then some other people at the con also said, well, I'd like to donate things. And people like ended up like donating a whole bunch of stuff that we could like sell on an auction. And what was so exciting about this was, you know, the organizers came to me and they were like, listen, if you raise £500, we'll throw in another £500 and we'll match you. But we had readers and writers and artists and creators like donating so much cool stuff, from crocheted whales to books that people had written. These are just some of the cool things that were on display. Fans, like somebody made like a beautiful crocheted thing. Terry Pratchett's daughter, Rihanna Pratchett, donated a signed copy of her dad's book, which sold for £6,000 on its own. And we ended up raising £20,000 for trans rights in South Africa and the UK. And it went so well, we ended up doing another auction where we raised another £14,000. So you can make a difference because other people are just as angry and feel just as overwhelmed and helpless as you do. And if we work together, we can like really do something interesting. The final lesson is make space. So I've given a variation on this talk with my friend Luyanda Unati Lewis Nyawo. We gave it at the Interesting Festival, and unfortunately they couldn't make it today because they're also an actor and they are currently filming in the Netflix show Wednesday. But also they couldn't get a Schengen visa. Even if they'd been able to come, they were really worried about trying to get a Schengen visa in time. Because the thing is that we are, as Africans and as the Global South, we are excluded from the conversation so much because of visa regulations, because of immigration. I live in the UK now because I have to. Because if I want to have a viable career in the places where you can genuinely make money, which is the UK and the US, I need to be based in one of those countries. There are really terrible things which happen. This was an example in 2022. There was a huge AIDS conference in Montreal. Now, of course, the African continent as a whole is disproportionately affected by HIV/AIDS. It also means that we have some of the best epidemiologists in the world, some of the most seasoned activists, best scientists, policymakers. We really know what we're talking about. But at this conference, which was held in Montreal, hundreds of African delegates were denied a visa. The head of UNAIDS, who's a black African, almost was not allowed to board the plane. She had to fight, and eventually she had to put out a tweet saying, like, I'm dealing with racism, they won't let me on the plane to Canada. And we are being denied a seat at the table for an issue which affects us. And it happens so much between the global south and the global north, where we need to be part of the conversation. So this is an immigration issue, it's a visa issue, it's conferences like this, where we need to make sure, and I know funding is a problem, and I know it's expensive, we need to make sure we include people as part of that conversation. I think what really drove this home for me, and this is my last slide, is in 2023 there were those huge fires in Alberta, and there was a beautiful video of South African firefighters. They flew out 300 South African firefighters, and they were singing and dancing in the airport, and they were just amazing. And I was like, oh, I love South Africa. We're such an amazing people. And I was like, wait, how did they get a visa? So, I think we need to make sure that the Global South is part of the conversation in a really meaningful way, and not just when we need to put out your fires. Thank you.
Let's go. Là en français, hein. Donc si ceux qui parlent
I
pas
will
français.
speak in French. You have receptors if you don't understand French.
Merci pour la présentation.
Thank you for your kind presentation.
Réfléchir à ma présentation.
I've been thinking a lot, really,
Et à la base, j'avais fait un truc sur mon travail et je sais pas si je vais
and
vraiment
I've done something on my work in the sense,
parler
and I will be sharing these words with you about why we should all be talking about fraternity.
à la base. Moi, je m'étais organisé, enfin, j'avais pas
And
trop quoi faire.
I didn't know what to do much at the beginning, so I thought, well, I should prepare a presentation. I'm Mohamed Bourouissa. Give me a second, please. You should be able to be okay. I'm not sure whether you can see it. I don't think so.
Ça marche ou pas?
Is it working?
Ça avait bien marché tout à l'heure.
Okay, it should be fine.
Présentation, travail.
Well, I organized a presentation of my work. This is the peripheral series that I did in 2006. I started doing this series. Sorry, I could hear myself talking. So I shot this series of pictures to talk about the periphery in Paris and what it means being a stranger, the populations living there, arriving from Africa, children of migrants. And I took this series talking about this violence, this tension that you can see on these pictures. And then I did a temps mort, or dead time, with a friend of mine who was spending some time in prison. I will quickly go through it because this is not what I should be focusing my presentation on. But the important thing about this documentary is that it talks about friendship. I believe that is right at the core of my work. When they said, hey, you're a great photographer, so I did a composition of these images about the relationships with my friends and people I would simply meet, people allowing me to take these shots. So all these relationships and these stories that really touched me. Here, you can see some messages I received, and it's this relationship, the fact that he was in prison, again, it was thinking about him that for me personally, is right at the heart of all my projects since the very beginning. Again, this relationship that I establish with people. And this is what I wanted to show you. The project on the resilient orchard or garden is a project that is more related to this context. And please let me tell you that I come from Bila in Algeria, 50 kilometers from Algiers, and this municipality
Merci à toi. Ça m'a fait penser à ça.
And I will also talk, thanks to your presentation, I will also talk about some other things from. I don't know who Bobino is because we could be talking about Édouard Glissant or Brasson. We need to decide where we start. So it's very interesting this because François Non is the hospital where he worked there in 1952 for 3 years. And what's really interesting about that story is that in that hospital, uh, created in 1953 by Antoine Perrault, and there they were being used all new techniques on psychiatric wards with musicotherapy, drawings, etc. And all these techniques to heal people were taken, but with theories that afterwards were initiated or used by Antoine Perrin in that hospital. And why am I explaining this? When Antoine Perrault launches this form of psychiatry, what happens? Well, people immediately start establishing dialogues. Um, Maybe there are some words missing in my head, but basically what I wanted to express is that he says we cannot heal such patients because we don't understand their languages, and this theory is filtered into common everybody's mentality. Please, please, please don't leave. No, no, I'm just kidding. Do whatever you like. Right. So don't worry. So back to my story. So in the general conscience of caring staff and nursing staff, we we can, but because they are indigent, they say, they don't know how to understand all these concepts. And it's absolutely horrifying that nurses may even think, obviously, colonial nurses, it was in their mind. The indigenous people cannot be healed because they don't understand, they said. When Fanon sees the state of things and starts working around these groups of people with ethnopsychiatry, this allows people to analyze the culture of the other, to be able to heal those people. And they have a great success. And this is what makes him militant and compromised as a writer during the war in Algeria. And the Fagnon and Boudazile and the clinical practice has been a great success. And Bouame was a tortured patient who was undergoing some psychiatric issues. And in the 60s, he was taken to that hospital and he actually benefited from Fanon's work, and he stayed for 40 years. And I was lucky enough to cover a project with him. And it was these wooden little builds or crafts. See here in the image? Well, it's something that I really remember because I'm somehow a keeper of that knowledge. This person had became a gardener through this therapy practice. And little by little, he managed to rethink the structure of a garden, to reimagine it. And this is why I wanted to bear witness of what this patient managed to do. There's always a relationship between the clinician and the doctor. And here, I'm also talking about this in my work. And here, this gentleman had this knowledge when we started working. He was around in his 80s, and I told him, listen, I would love to keep evidence of all this knowledge, which was not maybe theoretical, it came from his personal experience. of his know-how, his artisan craftsmanship, and his experience regarding space and the relationship with his body. So this really struck me the first time I saw these wooden structures, and I thought, wow, this is like his mental space. Here, I'm not sure whether we can see the video. There are some fragments online. I told this person, hey, could you help me? Could you teach me so that I can see what you've built? And thanks to him, I built this structure in my garden too. And I would also like to talk about the relationship with others. I don't like the word fraternity. I prefer friendship. What sort of relationships do we establish with others? This is an intimate, a very personal relationship. And having a less of a vertical relationship. So after this series, there's another relationship that I established with someone else. Departing from the experience that I had thanks to Mohamed and the idea of the orchard. And this had to do with plants again. This is not a joke, but I have the impression that I built this little garden in Liverpool, and I thought I was establishing some sort of communication and dialogue with plants. I would talk to them saying, "Hey, how are you feeling?" But I did establish a relationship, and I think that all of you have plants and care for them, right? For me, this relationship is shared by plenty of human beings. I come from the Parisian metropolitan area, and this relationship with plants, I must confess, was non-existing before. But little by little, thanks to the Orchard project in Liverpool, I realized that it was all about the object. I was objectivizing plants always, as I had done with Algerian citizens. I dehumanized that people and plants. So the moment arrived when I did some work where I tried to capture electric pulses of plants. So we did a music live show as if we were to be able to perceive electric as if we could ever perceive their breathing. And I did some photography, video, and then I arrived to the Quartier de Femmes, the women's neighborhood. I started with photography and I continued with the garden and then with this audio piece with the plants. And then I went back to theater and with New Adriana, with this actress. And it was all about modeling the body in space. Here it was all about the life element. And why do I say this? Because when I did Tambor, I was invited to create something around the idea of prison, and the masculine figure is a very central in my work. But I wondered, what does it mean to be a woman in prison these days? So during with Zazan Castro for a month or a month and a half, we organized some workshops at prison, and we talked with plenty of women imprisoned. And we organized this Quartier de Femmes, this theater play. It's the story of a young woman being sent to prison. And the story of this piece talks about friendship and how the meetings we have with people actually can change us. This was the last slide I wanted to share with you, and I believe this is all from me. Oh, just one more thing, please. In order to react to what it's been said before, there is a project that I have not spoken to you about yet, and it's the Saham Museum. For 5 years, I've been working with a group of Palestinian artists, and we've created a virtual museum where we try to portray works and peoples who have either been assassinated or pieces that have disappeared. And this project is a collective form, is a form of resistance to all my work is based on this principle. How can we make visible things? I don't know whether it's truly a form of resistance, to be honest with you, but whatever the case, what I'm trying to do is for these really interesting pieces not to disappear, not to die forever, and to show dignity. Of course, this is all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Mohamed, I wanted to ask you, do you think growing
Attends,
up...
attends, il faut que je prenne mon truc là pour traduire.
I meant to ask you, just one sec, please. I need my receivers.
Si on veut bien. Ça donne chaud, hein?
Your work's beautiful. I really enjoyed hearing about it. I wanted to ask, like, how much of your perspective is informed by you growing up in Algeria, and you're kind of a stranger in a strange land, living in Paris and France. Do you think that gives you a very different perspective?
Moi, je me sens pas étranger déjà d'une en France.
I don't feel as a foreigner living in France. That's the first thing. And secondly,
Même si j'ai grandi en Algérie,
even if I was born in Algeria, I arrived as a baby
j'ai pas cette sensation
to France, so I don't have this feeling anymore, but it's rather the way how others protect themselves, I guess. But no, it's not my feeling, to be honest.
plutôt la projection
So it's rather the projection of others doing on themselves. But yeah,
là en tout cas.
yeah.
C'est ça la question?
Is that all? Was that all the question? Yeah, yeah.
C'est pas si on passe quoi là maintenant? What do we have to do?
What do we do now?
Okay.
Yeah, I think for me, like, I've only been in the UK 4 years. And I think being there has really, and being able to travel and being able to like come from South Africa and like see the rest of the world, I'm always seeing the world through that perspective. All of my novels are through a South African point of view. So I'm constantly writing about kind of new apartheid states or segregation, racism. I'm very preoccupied with social justice, and I find that's informed absolutely who I am as a person, but also my work and the lens that I put on the world.
Yeah. C'est une question?
There was no pressure.
Was that a question?
Je sais pas si moi, je pense que le racisme, c'est quelque chose en tant qu'effectivement que
I
Français
believe that
d'origine
racism, as a Frenchman of Algerian origin, is something that you can feel and suffer constantly. It's I did the Genesis of Violence. It was a project that I had done previously in the past. And in fact, the thing is, for example, here we're talking about Glissant, Camus, but there is an author, a really important one for me, is Fanon. And I'll tell you why. He was completely forgotten by French history, totally made invisible because he said that we should kill colonizers. And I don't know whether this is worse than saying that indigenous cannot reach the world of ideas. And it's important to understand that back then, torture practices, all the assassinations were happening within a context. But Fanon, it really impacted me because he was a black man living in France. He studied in France. And then, due to a random fact, he had to go to Senegal. And in the end, he didn't go. He traveled to Algeria because there was no position for him to work in Senegal. So in Algeria, he wrote a part of his work, and he found the alterity, these other people, Algerians, and he said, maybe the idea of oppression is not something only related to my color of skin. Maybe it's a more global thing. And this is why Fanon is a very important author for me. And Glissant, I pretty like what he wrote, but I'm not a super fan because I believe that often Glissant is presented as an acceptable author, but I believe that Fanon can be complex, but it allows me to position myself not only as Algerian. I don't know whether this was actually related to what you mentioned before, sorry, but I still wanted to share it with you.
Should we open it up to the audience? Yeah.
Hola, gracias por vuestra presentación.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I don't know why, but I was thinking about the other as the enemy, right? And how we are seen as enemies and how fraternity is born or grows from the enemy's regard. I would like to know what you believe, what your view is regarding this.
I don't think, as soon as you make the other the enemy, I think you stop any way of engaging with people. It is difficult because you have the paradox of tolerance, which you have to be intolerant of intolerance. But I think if we're closing people off as the enemy, if we're saying they're completely other, I can't connect to them, there's no ways for me to like cross that bridge, that's dehumanizing in its own sense. So I really think we need to like to find a way to like reach out. I'm not going to tolerate people saying racist or sexist or transphobic things, but I don't think of those people as the enemy. I think of them as lacking in compassion and maybe education, and actually, you know, I think like we need more exposure and more dialogue. Look, I'm also, yeah, I have some vengeance in my body, where I do have assassination fantasies. Probably shouldn't say that on stage. Can we cut that from the recording, please? Do you have anything to add about the enemy?
No, okay.
We did say if we ran out of things to talk about, we would make each other enemies and we'd have a rap battle. So.
Ouais, on devait, c'est compliqué.
Or a dance-off. That's because now they want the rap battle.
Ok, bah cool, c'est fini. Bon bah, c'est vrai, non?
Right, good. Yeah,
Voilà.
Oh wait, there's a question.
Ah.
Yep.
Ah.
Thank you so much, both of us, for the presentation. So I will speak in French because I'm more easily used French for speak. You say, tu as dit, la fraternité.
You said that fraternity for you is a word that you're not going to be using because it's more hierarchical, vertical. You said it's In this sense, how do you transpose or translate?
Donc, tu expliquais que l'amitié est un acte de libre choix.
You said that it's a free choice act, and for the two of you, given what's happening in the world right now, how can we use friendship to dismantle apartheid systems, for example, happening right now, and the prohibition to choose one another, I wonder?
J'ai l'impression que c'est déjà par. En tout cas, même moi, je parle
I
même de ma
think
position d'artiste.
in my case, as an artist,
C'est quand même une position de pouvoir. Mais il faut que moi, j'ai conscience que cette position.
I need to be aware that my position is one of power.
Ouais, mais viens, tu sais quoi, viens, on va faire un. J'ai conscience, viens, tu sais quoi, on est pareil. Tu sais, je fais un projet.
When people come and tell you, hey, I have this artistic project, and no, when people come, no, I come here with my suggestions as an artist and my position in the artistic context, where I have some recognition. So if I want to work on that, but if I'm not aware of my power position, it's very easy to fall into contradictions or inequalities. So what we need is that for me to be aware of it and take into consideration when we are trying to dialogue on the table. So if you, it's really stupid to expect that everybody is the same, and we're all at the same level. At least this is what I do. I'm aware of this. Right, there is a certain level of inequality. And if we try to pretend, hey, everything's cool, we're all equal. No, it doesn't work like this. So, if we talk about fraternity and friendship, okay, but being always aware of your position with regards to the other, because if I talk about friendship with Mohamed, there's this know-how, this savoir-faire about this guy, Mohamed, when he was doing this wooden, back in 2013, the wooden structures. And 3 years later, I went back to see the structures, and people back in the hospital, they had destroyed them. They had not taken into consideration what he had done. Why broke it? Because he was a patient. If it had been a doctor, a specialist, saying, hey, this is the work that I've done, this know-how that I've devoted on these wooden structures, they would not have seen it in the same manner. But as he was a secondary person, let's say a patient, it's as if he didn't have this right to occupy the space of a knowledge. And this is my work. I am turning this upside down. I am saying, hey, show me what you've done. Share with me your knowledge, even though you don't have a diploma, or this person had some expertise. So this is, for me, this level of awareness is what we need when we talk about fraternity. Where do we position ourselves when we talk about fraternity? Which is your standpoint? This is basic for me. And I believe that it's really important to position ourselves. When you're a white man, I believe that there are people, and I refer to the Parisian region, some friends that I have. It's not so obvious, there are several ways of doing things, codes and standpoints, some things that we don't know. I believe fraternity cannot happen outside such a bubble without context. And if I say this, is because there's a a theory, a mathematical theory, I forgot the name, and there's an element to it regarding related to context, meaning that you could be in your lab building your stuff and you have some experience, but if this know-how that you produce, you put it into a different space and context, the experience will not be the same because it will be confronted to a different environment and context. This is what I wanted to say.
I think for me, it's about kind of picking up, being able to see other people's perspectives. So it's about being open-minded, being curious, being willing to engage. It's about platforming other voices and making sure that other people get heard. And I think it's incredibly difficult, but like being able to change your mind. So there were, in the 2000s, there was a movement to pull down statues in South Africa. It started as Rhodes Must Fall. He was the big colonial hero. Cecil John Rhodes, he was trying to build a railway from Cape Town to Cairo. Millions of Africans died building it. And students at the University of Cape Town were like, this isn't okay. We don't want a statue to this man here. So they tore it down, and that led to the Fees Must Fall protests, where university students were like, hey, we were promised free education in, when democracy came in, and fees are too expensive, and it means education, which is so essential, and it's a tenet of our constitution. We need this to be, like, fees need to drop. And the students started that way, but then they started talking to the cleaners. So they were out every day protesting. What was really interesting is the white students, even today, started forming a defensive line in front of the black students, because even in South Africa today, the police are more willing to attack black students than they are white students. But then they also started talking to the cleaners, because they were out there every day, and they found out that they were getting paid terrible salaries. They were on contracts. They didn't have any rights and protections, and they brought them into the protests as well. So it's about expanding. It's about changing your mind. It's about also being able to admit when you're wrong. Also coming out of Ubuntu was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where people sat and had hearings about the atrocities that were done under apartheid by both sides, by the apartheid government and also by activists. And I think it was a really important process of telling the stories and coming to terms with it. But I think where it failed was that white people never had to take responsibility. We never had to apologize. We never had to say, I acknowledge how much privilege this gave me, and the fact that I grew up white under South Africa meant I grew up in a utopia that was designed for me and designed to give me every opportunity. So I acknowledge that, but a lot of other South Africans don't. And I think the other failure was that, and I think this is something we need, is reparations. The TRC recommended reparations, and that was not possible because the apartheid government was bankrupt, which was the only reason they had the referendum. The only reason we actually got democracy is because sanctions worked. But I think reparations is essential if we're going to try and fix things. And that's to the continent, it's to people who've been enslaved, not just in South Africa.
Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you very much, both of you. I meant to rethink that we need this reparation and to see that we're different, as you said, Mohamed. So yeah, thank you both.